So when it comes to nutritional ketosis, can athletes benefit from the ketogenic diet? It's a common question that comes up. I get direct messages. I'm sure you're curious about that as well. So in this video, we're going to talk about the pros and cons when it comes to being keto adapted for sport. And we're going to talk about both strength and kind of fast twitch type sports like jiu-jitsu, powerlifting, and endurance sports. So let's just tackle the endurance sports first because I think it's a little bit shorter, a little bit more straightforward. So endurance athletes can benefit greatly from the ketogenic diet because endurance athletics lends itself to fatty acid oxidation primarily anyhow, right? There's a lot of long duration, low intensity, high volume that lends itself to fatty acid oxidation. So endurance athletes are naturally pretty fat adapted. Now the nuances come when there's an event, right? A bike race. I used to be a Cat 2 cyclist, and a lot of bike racing is you're hovering around 250, 300 watts for a long time. So it's hard, but it's not that hard. But when it comes to a sprint finish, that's very glycolytic. So how do you sort of manage that? And one of the things that I recommend to people is train in sort of a low state. Marc Bubbs talks a lot about this. He has a new great book out. I haven't yet read it, but he's been on the podcast before. I'll link it below.
Sure.
So let's talk about that, the eat low, train low. Can you define that and kind of explain?
So this is the idea where, we used to think right after training we had to feed you all of these nutrients to accelerate recovery. And whilst overall that's still a good approach, there's again, more advanced techniques where we would then say, Mike, you just trained hard, you're a cyclist. We're actually not going to feed you a lot of carbohydrate. We're going to give you a little bit of protein. And then we're going to train you again in the morning, so you're in this really low glycogen state. That's going to be stressful on your body, but on the back end, we're going to elicit some adaptations that are going to help you down the road. Now that kind of strategy, it's quite good to have, a personal trainer or a nutritionist or somebody working with you if you're new to it, because it can go wrong a little bit. But it's just interesting that we can time or manipulate where we're putting the fuel in to give us those adaptive responses. And again, people always think I want to be able to feel amazing when I train all the time, but to elicit a response sometimes you got to feel crappy while you train, and then you feel better down the road versus just always trying to feel great every session. And I think that's where sometimes people get into trouble, because that means you're relying on the endorphins, so you're always in that same energy system, or you're pouring a lot of caffeine or sugar in to give you that sensation too.
The idea that you can train in a low state, meaning that when you're doing most of your training, you're kind of in a fasted or low carbohydrate style state, and that lends itself to improve mitochondrial biogenesis, improve some of the capillary density, and cause the adaptations needed to enhance fatty acid oxidation and ketone synthesis and utilization. We talked on the podcast with Peter Attia about the monocarboxylate transporters. So these are the transporters that enable ketones and lactate and pyruvate to get in and out of cells.
I do believe that one difference between me and a world-class athlete is the density of MCT transporters in their muscle. So I think they are much more efficient at getting lactate back into circulation, back to the liver. And I do think you can train that. I think there are some people that are going to be born with, just as we see a spectrum of height or strength or any characteristic that matters genetically, you'll see the same thing. But I also think that can be trained, and I think
they're inducible.
Yeah, I do. I believe it's inducible. I've seen some animal data to suggest it, and I had an interesting idea for an experiment that you could do in cyclists to see over a 3-month period if you could induce it. But you would need to do muscle biopsies to demonstrate that.
To get that.
And we couldn't get an IRB for it.
Wonder why? It wasn't.
It was just. I don't know. It was deemed like really invasive. A muscle biopsy is obviously much more invasive than a blood test or something like that.
These are inducible, meaning that you can upregulate the expression of these cellular transporters that help to cause your body to better able to utilize and break down what's called ketolysis and the utilization of ketones. So to summarize, training in a fasted or low state can enhance this. So that's one of the benefits of kind of training low. Now the downside of training low or training fasted is sometimes your power output, sometimes the fuel in the tank is needed to have a really good workout. So I don't recommend training low all the time. It really depends on the type of workout that you're doing. But the premise here that I want to convey to anyone that's embarking on becoming more fat adapted or keto adapted and their training is to not become a hero. Have some flexibility. So if you're going to do a really hard workout, if you're going to max out, do a max effort, that could be a hill climb, time trial, that could be a max effort squat, bench press, fuel your workout appropriately. And so if you know that having some carbohydrates beforehand, even if you're ketogenic most of the day or most of the week, that's not going to cause a bunch of aberrant health issues. Outside of maybe if you have epilepsy, for example, right? So I recommend to people train mostly in a low state when the workout's warranted, but when you're having a lot of volume, a lot of intensity, or you're training for a race type situation, don't be scared to throw in some carbohydrates. A lot of us kind of have this rigid mindset where we're fasting or we're not, we're keto or we're not. And to transition a little bit more to some of the things that I've learned from interviewing people and experimentation over the last 4 years of being keto is, having carbohydrates, I can have north of 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrates on a particular day, as long as I'm physically active. And I test my glucose and ketones later on in the day, again, after having these carbohydrates. My blood millimolar of beta-hydroxybutyrate can be north of 0.6, and my glucose will still be under around 80. So that's the idea that if you're physically active, your body naturally will make ketones as a compensatory mechanism to possibly enhance glycogen resynthesis in the post-workout window and much more. So hopefully you understand that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing approach. You can customize this, you can have carbohydrates, and if you're exercising, you can still be in a ketogenic state. So that's I think, big take-home point number 2. Big take-home point number 3 that I'm still trying to figure out is how to overcome this flat look. And what I mean by flat is this is actually, for those of you that don't lift weights, you might not totally understand what I'm talking about, but for people that do powerlifting or bodybuilding or just weightlifting in general, this flat look is when you're depleted in carbohydrates, your muscles don't have a full feel. And this is not just aesthetics, a problem of looks and so forth. It's a problem, I think, of performance. And so what I found is if that's where carb loading or carb backloading or post-workout carbohydrates can come in. Now, some of you might say, well, Mike, haven't you read Finney and Volek's book and look at their research and the FASTER study? And basically, the long story short of that study that is pertinent to this conversation is fat-adapted athletes can certainly replenish glycogen to a great extent, even possibly higher than high-carb adapted athletes. But that still doesn't kind of take away this notion that when you're fat adapted, your muscles can have a flat look, as mine do now. And part of that is it's cold out. Part of that is that I like to film videos in a fasted state. So how do you overcome this flat look and feel? I don't know the solution for that. Some say you need to upregulate or just increase your salt intake. The more lean body mass you have, the more fat adapted you are, the more that you fast, the more salt you'll release. And there actually was a study that showed in the first 3 days of a fast, they looked at sodium excretion in the urine. Salt release was very high in the first 36 to 48 hours of a fast. So keep that in mind. So manipulate salt, but I don't know that there's a way to circumvent or overcome this flat look that occurs when you're fat adapted in training and exercising in a low state. So is it a calorie function? Is it an electrolyte balance? I'm not really sure. I haven't figured that out, and I don't know that anyone has. So if you're stepping on stage and you're a bodybuilder and you don't know ways to overcome the flat look, that's where carbohydrates come in. And so look, if you're trying to be keto for health, but you're doing a bodybuilding competition, just get out of your own way and just have the whole food derived carbohydrates for that particular event. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so I think, again, it's customizing this based upon your own unique goals. And if you have ideas, I would love to know what your ideas are if you're a fat adapted low carb athlete, how to overcome this flat look that can occur. Let me know. And I think other people would benefit. So type in comments below. But last kind of thing, what I personally do when it comes to weightlifting is when I do back day, because that's a lot of muscle groups, rows, pull-ups, deadlifts, things like that. And when I train legs heavy, I have carbohydrates intra-workout in the post-workout window. What does that look like? Well, I'll have some sweet potatoes, butternut squash, yams, things like that. I'll pre-cook them. I'll bring them with me to the gym and just have pieces during the workout. Now, I know this might get some of you butthurt that are diehard keto folks. I have a better workout when I do that. Does that mean that I'm not keto adapted? Does that mean that I'm cheating? Does that mean, I don't know how to interpret this on a bigger picture. All I know is that when I go to the gym, I want to have a good workout. If carbohydrates, periodically help me do that, then so be it. I can induce ketosis by fasting later on in the day or by exercising or compressing the feeding window. So you can kind of have the best of both worlds. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have a great workout by being totally fasted or being totally carbohydrate free. It's totally up to you. But I think it's important to have this open mind that we need to do what works for our own bodies and customize things accordingly. So hopefully you resonate with that message. If you did, you can hit that like button. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know. If you didn't, or you have a different opinion, I would love to know as well. So comments are below, and I'll post some studies that I referred to earlier by Finney and Volek, the FASTER study. It's worth reading wherever you are in the low carb, high carb spectrum, because I think there's some good insights that we can glean from, and it'll help us to kind of change our perspective and the dogma around exercise and carbohydrates involvement in exercise performance. All right, I'm Mike Mutzel. Appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully you have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.